Geog A to Z, supporting the National Festival of Fieldwork from the Geographical Association. Do join in. U is for urban stories. So think about the urban spaces that you teach in or near. Think about the viewpoints that the children could see, people coming and going. Think about how traffic and travel connections are within your space. Think about the different buildings, the different building types, and the story of our urban spaces over the last 50, 100, or 150 years. So we've got to have a sense of surveying urban life with children and going out and about and collecting different sorts of data that I've talked about in other videos in this series. So we could look at weather. We could perhaps look at the temperature, the wind, the rain, and maybe even go cloud spotting. Knowing the different names of clouds is something really fascinating to children, and it gives them something to look at during playtime and when they're looking outside the window. Maybe they could write a daily diary for a week, maybe on their way to school, and from school they could be actively looking at those different sorts of temperature aspects. And then they could compare it to a weather app that you could show them, the BBC weather app and so on. Do they actually agree with what we can see outside our window based on what our postcode says online? Why do they agree? Why do they not agree? So you can get into some good discussion points there. And of course, if we're surveying urban life, we need to think about the seasons, how our spaces and places change over time, whether there are green spaces that have trees or buildings that they change over time. And of course, we could therefore look at how shadows are cast by trees or buildings and how we can kind of perhaps draw those and show how they move over time. Certainly, that's a very good science experiment that you might well do with children, where you get the children to draw around the whole shadow and see how that moves across the playground almost magically. So you get into conversations there about the Earth in space and the sun and so on. Then, of course, you could talk about litter and leaf fall. Where are the leaves falling? When do they fall? How many fall? Could they even count them? I mean, it's quite a nice little survey to do through September, October, and November, and maybe have some sense over the years whether those leaves fall at different times. You could perhaps keep track of that yourself. And in terms of litter, where does the litter come from? Sometimes you can have playgrounds where no litter is dropped by your children. It's kind of blown by the wind into your playground from elsewhere, maybe from the local secondary school or from overflowing bins. So think about disposal of bin waste as well. Maybe map your local bins, maybe then request more, write to the local mayor, and so on. And then, of course, you could survey urban life in terms of thinking about noise maps, where the quiet, the medium, or the loud places. Maybe you could do some testing of that through a decibel meter, or maybe through a phone app, an iPad app, or something else like that. And maybe think about the frequency of those noises. Are they consistent? Is it like a drone, a background white noise, or is it because it's to do with the aircraft flying overhead? Maybe you're not too far from an airport. And just in the last few days, I've seen that people have been using these sorts of apps as part of the Festival of Fieldwork. So do perhaps investigate those. You can get kind of very good quality ones, like that Kestrel one that I was investigating just now online, or you can get some other ones as well at a much cheaper price. You can have digital anemometers, and you can have all that kind of weather data collected by children through the kind of old-fashioned kind of analog methods, but also some of the more digital methods as well through our devices that we can find. The second thing, if we're exploring our urban lives, we need to think about buildings and what they're used for. And this is from an Amex campaign a number of years ago. And I just love this Peter Blake composite image that he came up with about a range of different high street heroes that you could think about. So it's important to know what shops do, but it's the people behind the shops as well. Get the children introduced to the sorts of people who are buying and selling things. You may not be lucky enough on your local high street to have these sorts of exquisite things on sale, but actually teaching them somewhere that in your town there are maybe farmers markets, or there are places that you can buy these strange and weird and wonderful items of all sorts of different types. So show them that yes, many of us shop in supermarkets all the time, but actually perhaps we do have this kind of historic attachment to the high street and the sorts of things that you can still buy in high streets as well. So maybe introduce them to an image like this and then check them off. Where would you buy these sorts of things near to you? Is everything bought from big box retail stores? Because of course, when you actually think about the number of different items that we buy, or the number of different services that we need to opt into over time, over a month, over 3 month period, there are so many different things that we might bear in mind. We may not use nail salons ourselves or tanning salons ourselves, but I certainly know near me there are a number of those that parents, guardians of children may well actually be using. Where do we get things repaired if we want to do that? Where is there a place where we could have our shoes um, resewn or resold or so on? So the kind of idea of what different stores do, mobile phone replacements, perhaps a good example one that they may have come across, is a really important thing for them to consider. There are some things that we can only do on a local high street, and when you actually look at the long list of different things that we perhaps sometimes need to do to get done locally, particularly in terms of the services. We need to perhaps tap into those with children, because they may never go into these things. They don't come into their lives very often, or they don't come into their lives at all, because they're done during the school hours when the children are at school. And of course, some of them, like a vape shop, you may not want to go into a great detail about what sorts of things they sell, but they will be part of their children's lives. So this is part of their personal geographic experience of what goes on where. And of course, our job as a geographer is not to judge what people are doing, but it is to kind of explain the way the world actually is. So another thing that we can think about in terms of the buildings is homes, of course, and the whole numbering of streets, which is very complex and um, easy for children to misunderstand. So we can think about the odd and the even, and to go on an odd and even hunt with children along the street could be an interesting thing to do. Have they ever noticed this? Have they ever thought about their house is this, and the one next to them is not necessarily the next number in order? You have a number and then you miss a number, have a number and then miss a number. So how does that work? And the one opposite to you will not necessarily be any relation to the number that you have. So you might be number 10, but you could be opposite number 25. So how does that actually work in practice? So maybe get the children to label that on a map, and certainly Ordnance Survey, if you zoom in on a Digimaps tool to those, you can sort of see the different numbers on the maps, and you can kind of see how higgledy-piggledy they actually are in practice. So maybe some homes have a name and they don't actually have a number, and there may be a reason for that, and you could go into that. So let's label land use. How is land used, whether that's a field, a playground, a shop, or a car park? And then, of course, we could do a sights and smells walk to unpack our urban environments. We could record smells with words. Maybe that's a petrol smell, maybe that's a food smell, a flower smell. Certainly, there may be some industry near you. I certainly know near me. There's a laundry and there's a bakery on an industrial site. And if the wind's blowing a particular way, that is a smell that will be on the journey to a school near me for some of these children. So it is not necessarily just the high street, it's the kind of other industry that's near you as well. Maybe other things are being made or cooked and so on. So write down the landmarks, and maybe children could choose their favourites in terms of that. Again, as I started off at the beginning, thinking about people and where they move to, moving through space. Maybe if you get a vantage point like this was at the top floor, the first floor of a shopping centre, and I really could have imagined having children stationed there, looking at people carrying things, people moving through space. Are they in pairs? Are they in groups? What time of the day is this? Where do you think people are going? Are they going to that particular transport hub? Are they going to the big set of stores at the Westfield shopping centre behind? Are they going to the local high street stores? Are they parking their bicycle? Are they using an electric bicycle? There's all sorts of different stories of people, and get the children to be curious and to look. It's a really interesting thing for them to do. Then the final tip and trick here is to get the children who are very young, maybe between the ages of 3 and 7, or even older, just to get the children to stop and to look, to get them to hunt colours in their urban environment. And this great website that I found, where you could come up with colour palettes or download some of the ones that are available, is really a worth one to look into. So colours.co. If you go on the trending page, you can really print out, maybe give these out to children and get the children hunting around their school site, hunting around a park, hunting as they go around with their clipboards on the high street. Can they find these colours in nature, but also in the signs and the different textures that they can see, the materials the urban environment and the urban fabric is made of? I could really imagine you using these, even with soil. These are very soil type colours as well. So it doesn't seem like geography, but it's looking, it's surveying, it's gathering data, it's trying to unpack different facets of that environment on a very Key Stage 1 or even an early years appropriate level. So just finally, let's explore the streets. Let's really think about the streets' names, maybe your school name as well. Why is it called that? Is it named after a person or a particular location? Is there a pattern to why those streets are called those names? Certainly there are streets near here which are named A Street, B Street, C Street, D Street, and they all seem to be given quite random names, maybe based on a bit of physical geography, maybe based on the names of the people that built that street. Maybe there's connections to the Lake District, connections to Ireland, connections to all sorts of places around the world. Sometimes you will see that. There's other streets near me which are named after famous painters. So there's a Constable, there's a Hogarth, there's all sorts of other different names of streets that kind of have some link to the past, link to a particular set of data that we could talk to children about. Consider signs. Consider whether they're safety signs, command signs, what do they say and where are they placed? And then finally consider how people can move through that space. Are there paths for people? Look for desire lines, slow peoples down by considering obstructions. Look at this particular street. Is this suitable for all people? Can all people move through this street in an equal way? Clearly, car traffic has been removed from this street, but is this street a good street for all? Count the cracks, count the trees breaking the tarmac, count the microplants that are growing through the cracks as well. All the time getting children to look and to stop and to stare and to notice what's happening in that environment and how is it changing and why. These are very geographical ideas to think about. Tomorrow, we're thinking about viewpoints, so do join me.